right now, when you look at our screen, what you see is kind of that rotating banner, but directly below that is an annual performance report that was designed to put visualization to the data that's available in the more standard annual performance report. So if you clicked on this version of the annual performance report, what you will see, and I'm just going to let it pull up the first district, it pulls it automatically, and charter schools are included in that. It will pull up each individual district, and you can look at the information. So what we tried to do for this particular document is to make sure that parents, it was easier to understand for parents. Like when you look at an MPI, it's not necessarily intuitive for a parent to look at that. They're not going to come home and say, what is my MPI? What was your MPI? So we really wanted to think through what that information looked like. So this is what the district, in this instance, a charter school, what their breakdown looked like by proficiency. And when you hover over different pieces of it, it will provide you with documentation, information that can be used by the stakeholder when they're reviewing the data. And then you'll come down and you'll also see growth, and growth is displayed a little differently than we're used to seeing it, which is just whether or not it's statistically significant or not. But this actually reflects the percentage, so and where they were. So in this particular instance, we'll use the student group, their growth was above average, and so you'll see that it's marked by color and by number. And then we display the rest of the information, and it's in more detail than you would see definitely in an APR. So if you looked at success ready students, which if you think back to MSIP 5 was a lot of those college and career readiness measures, what we're showing in this particular report is what percentage of their students actually earned that particular item. And it may or may not apply to that particular grade span. And so you will see some of this. In this particular instance, this is a school that's growing and may have just had a first year of graduates or didn't have graduates at all, so that they are looking at the high school readiness measure. And because we really wanted to move away from thinking just about points and to encourage our school districts and charters to think about the underlying data, we moved points to the very end of the report. So that's what you see at the very end. And then in between all of that are those other things that we talk about: attendance, the ICAP. If you're an elementary building or district with kindergarten students, the kindergarten entry assessment, and then those other things that we look at in terms of classification. Did the school comply with state statute? Do they have an appropriately certified superintendent? And then do they meet the fund balance requirements? So that's what you see in this version of the APR. If you go back to our homepage and you select data and the MCDS portal, you'll see kind of this document that you're used to seeing in the portal, and you select reports and resources. And then over on this side, school performance and accountability. And you select this particular version of the report. What you're going to see is, I'm trying to find one that has all grade levels. You're going to see a report that you're very familiar with in terms of its usual structure, right? Here's how many points were possible. Here's how many points were earned. This is how you earned them, whether you met growth or not, how many growth points you earned, whether or not you're on track. And you'll see that for each of these individual pieces of the plan. And so This is a very kind of typical thing. It will also have your participation rate for that particular assessment year. So we had lots of questions going into the delivery of this report. And so let's talk a little bit about some things that we saw that might have been a struggle. And I'm talking about not necessarily related to assessment, because I want districts to remember that they have all of their assessment data early in the summer, long before we have the APR. So they're getting that information back from their vendors. It's coming after they complete their assessment window. And the APR is really about accountability. So let's talk about a few things that caused a struggle for some of our districts this year. The first one is the ICAP, or the Individual Career and Academic Plan, for our students who are exiting 8th grade. By statute, that's required to be in there. I know many of you may not be responsible for the MSIP core data reporting, but that shows up as an optional field, but it's required reporting if the district wants to earn the points, because it's the only way for us to see that. Okay, if we made it a required reporting item, it would be required every time you submitted the student core file, which could be a little bit overwhelming, but it is a required field in June. So I would begin talking to my school counselors in buildings where I have 8th grade students and say, where are you at with the ICAP, and how are you moving forward? Do all of your students have an ICAP? Are they ready to have that planning document as they enter high school? The next item that may have caused a little bit of unease is the kindergarten entry assessment, which has a time frame for the administration, and actually has 3 specific options and an other. Many districts and charter schools were concerned that the department was going to make a change to that list for this particular year. The list itself will remain the same. And as we move into year 4, year 3, the 23-24 school year, then those will become the required assessments. So for this particular school year's APR, the 22-23 APR, that will remain the same. Let's go back to ICAP for a minute, because we know that we have students with disabilities, and the statute's pretty specific. Every student should have an ICAP. If a district has a planning document that they're using for their students with disabilities that encompasses the same types of items to help plan that student's progression, that would be acceptable to report as well. So we talked about ICAP, we talked about KEA. Let's talk a little bit about submission of MSIP core data. That also caused a little bit of consternation this year. I do not anticipate that that there will be any changes at all to the files that were used. So the files that districts that the department indicated to districts we would use for the 21-22 annual performance report will also be used for the 22-23 annual performance report. I'm trying to recall if we had others. Typically not. A few reminders about just reporting and other information in general. The audit and the annual secretary of the board report are also included in the timely submission of documents. So I would make sure that your district is having conversations with the auditor about what the expectations are for that timeline. That's pretty important. The other thing to note is that the submission of MSIP core data is based on the original submission date. So if the district or charter school meets the June 30th deadline for those June core files, we are not going to look at a submission date that includes a correction later. We're looking at the initial submission. So does that kick off any questions for you, Shauna or Valerie, or anybody that's online with us?
Yeah, we did have a question in the chat. Is ICAP in the core data cycle?
So yes, ICAP is in the core data. It's in the student core file. It shows up in multiple submissions. So you'll actually see it for the first time in October, but it is in the June student core. And again, it's what it says is it's an optional submission. But that is the language for whether or not you need to submit it in every single cycle. If it's a required item, then it's submitted in October and it's submitted again in January, and then it's submitted again later. And so it says optional for submission. It is not optional for accountability purposes.
Jocelyn, can I ask a quick question? What about like students who are not with us full time? So we have some students who come, like we had 11 students this year who like they're private school students and they come to us for like an hour of SPED, or their homeschool service and they come to homeschool students and they come to us for like social activity for PE or whatnot, because we did not get our full 4 points because of those 11 students. And since they were here for such a short time, we didn't find, so.
Yeah, and so what I would encourage everyone to remember is that year one was a pilot, and there are some things that we are currently reviewing for the year two process that we will meet with our MAC to discuss. Sherry, that is one of the items that is on our list, is the consideration of some of those types of things and unintended consequences. So just to let you know that we are having those conversations, and additional information will be coming out to districts probably the middle of June. I'm going to stop sharing my screen unless somebody would like me to leave it up.
Jocelyn, I have a question about the kindergarten assessment, and I don't know if it's right now, but so this year we used the KOF, but we didn't upload the data to their system because we had some data breach concerns. Next year, are we going to be required to upload it to their system for it to count, or can we continue to do it internally?
So you will continue, I believe, to do that. And what it's going to look like is I mean, again, we're not looking at scores. We're just looking at whether or not you assess the student. So I think the process remains the same. Okay. But I will actually look into that, Megan, and see what I can find out.
That would be great, because I know some districts, it didn't pass our data requirements, and so we couldn't partner with them for the data component. So if we know we're going to have to do something, then we probably need some lead time.
Right. And if you're doing the KOF, you're going to meet the requirements for that assessment. So as long as we have that information in your data file, we'll just pull that through the process, just like we do for other data.
All right, thank you.
Let's see, Shauna, did you have some questions that you had thought of based on feedback you had been hearing?
I was telling Val, she did more core data at her district, so she might have better questions than I do. I help people more on the front end of making sure that data is good. So I think some of the questions that I've heard or concerns have just been that these scores are released, but their districts, are they really being held accountable, or this is considered a test year?
Yeah, so year one has always been designated as a pilot year for this annual performance report. The state law is pretty specific about how the state board can utilize the standards and indicators for accountability purposes. So the state board approved those standards in February of 2020, which was kind of, I don't know, fortuitous maybe that's probably not the right word, because then in March, we immediately were in the middle of COVID. And not that priorities changed, because making sure that students perform remains a priority regardless of the circumstances. But there were so many more important things that we needed to think about for kids, safety, making sure they were fed, all of those other activities kind of took over. But the law says we can't use those standards or indicators to hold a district, to classify school districts for 2 years after the passage of the rule. So that would have been February of 22, which meant we could use those for that school year. And we were in the middle of developing those standards and indicators. So that's kind of why it took us a little bit longer. And we had some requests to push that release out until later in the spring. And so we paid attention to that, but we also knew going into this that sometimes there are unintended consequences, and that we would have the release of the report, and then we would take a step back and look at all of the key components utilized in the report and see if there were any changes that needed to be made, or if things were functioning exactly as we anticipated they would. And we're in the process right now. We'll be meeting with our advisory committee shortly. We'll be making the revisions that we believe are necessary based on some of the feedback we're hearing. And then we will move forward with another public meeting, which we're required by law to do before we generate an annual performance report based on any of those changes. So there is still some processing that needs to happen before we release the revised version of the comprehensive guide. But we're listening. So if people have questions or concerns, now is the time to share them.
Is there any thought or conversation about changing the growth status, since that heavily favors smaller districts? That
at the present time, the answer to that, Sherry, is no. That doesn't mean that it will not happen. That is not one of the key changes for the upcoming year. So we will keep having those conversations, and individuals who have questions or concerns about that should probably reach out with the letter or some sort of document letting us know what their concerns are.
And this will be the last one, I promise. I love that you guys keep releasing the updates, right? So there was one in 228 and there's one on 47. The document is not thin, right? It's a large document.
Right, it is not.
Although we are all in it a lot, we're probably not in as much as you are. So your team. So if there could be a summary page at the front of like, these are the changes and these are the pages, that would be so helpful.
Sherry, that's great feedback. We have done that before in prior versions of MSIP, and it does make it easier for our districts and charter schools to understand the change that happened and sometimes the potential impact of what's being changed. So we can do that, yes.
I have a question. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, the other thing, and this is one of those things that I just thought of when Shauna said, think about the quality of the data in advance. I'm going to use this as an example. So every year we generate a report that's a standards report. That's what districts are used to seeing the name by. So it's like standard 3. It won't be that any longer. But standard 3 and MSIP 5 was success ready, and MSIP 6. Every year for our reports, we have generated a document, a report for districts to use. So for example, for the college and career readiness measures in the Success Ready version, there is a report that says LEA assessment information for college and career readiness, right? And what it looks at is how many of your students took the ACT, the SAT, AccuPlacer, right? We do that so that districts can see that data in advance of the report generation, of the APR report generation. And the reason that we do that is to allow our districts to see the data that we're using. So Sherry, because I've known you the longest and I don't really recognize very many other folks, I'm going to pick on you. In Sherry's district, let's say they have 100 students in the high school and they're getting ready to graduate 30 of them. That's really bad math, but it'll work for this example. We're going to look to see how many of those 30 students have an ACT, an SAT, an AccuPlacer, an ASVAB, and points are awarded to each student based on that and then aggregated. We generate that report so Sherry can pull it, look at the data, compare it to what's in their student information system, and make sure that we have everybody that needs to be in the report. Because sometimes they're missing, honestly. A student may put in the wrong school district or whatever from the data we get from a third-party vendor. What I would ask you to please not do is compare your student information system data to your student information data and assume that it's right. Because if it's in your student information system, it's going to be right to you, right? So if you compare it to what you've already submitted previously, it's probably right. But it's entirely possible that what we have looks different. So you could have all 30 of those kids in your local student information system showing that they've participated in something and may have scored well enough to get more than participation points. But if the vendor that we get the data from doesn't have that information in their file, the student entered, again, the wrong district, didn't enter any district, then they're going to show up as not having points. When Sherry knows full well that student Jocelyn took the ACT and scored above an 18. So we're generating these reports for all of the standards that are academic achievement. You already have tools that do that. So you'll have the same sort of tool for the KEA, for the ICAP. You already have attendance out there. You have a grad file. You have an assessment history file, so you can tell if all of your students have taken the end of course assessment. So all of those tools are available to districts to look at. They can already begin seeing where those students are and if the data is there. And summer is a horrible time for our small districts, but they really need to have somebody there who can look at the data when we start pushing information back out that's generated for the APR.
I know I lied. You knew that I was going to come back with one more question. I'm so sorry. So this keeps getting missed, and I want to make sure because we're meeting with Slacker and Stark this Friday.
Mm-hmm.
So the whole thing with EOCs, it's not really right test, right time anymore. It kind of is, but like if they are in the class right now, and this is starting with freshmen,
Mm-hmm.
they have to take that assessment in that year, right?
If they have mastered the content, if you've awarded credit to them, then the student should be assessed. Yes.
So if they're not,
Mm-hmm.
then, so I'm a freshman this year. I take algebra for some reason. I'm sick the whole entire time. I'm going to get an LND. So I can't even make it up before I graduate, right? I'm going to get an LND.
I'm going to answer this question in the best way I can at the moment. This is one of the items that is currently under review.
Okay.
And so there will be more information to share about that. If the student is sick throughout the entire window, the district probably should submit an appeal or a request to allow for that student to assess in a different year. But it would be like starting the year and doing the assessment in the fall, but I would anticipate hearing additional information related to the end of course assessments and right test right time and what that looks like and how it functions. I would anticipate additional information.
For districts who are playing catch up to that particular rule or the new change. So for example, we're testing some algebra to catch up in kids are in geometry.
Mm-hmm.
And so that it's really more of a 1-year problem for us. How will that impact any L&Ds that come out in the spring?
Okay, so if you're playing catch up to that, really, what's happening is, to the extent that we can, we have allowed the graduate L&Ds to continue while we have students who may have tested. Let's say they're going to be a junior this year or a senior this year. They took algebra when they were a freshman, but somehow they should have been. They didn't test for whatever reason. Remember, we still have some of those COVID exceptions out there, so that takes care of some of them. But others of them, if they were a freshman when they took the test and they didn't test, they will count, and it was several years ago, they could still test for the graduate L&D. Does that make sense? So
yeah, absolutely. No, that does make sense. And so I think because we were one of those districts that, believe me, I hated what we were doing, doing the algebra 1 after algebra 2. I hated it. It was a logistical nightmare, and now we're paying for it. So I get it. I do just for feedback think that the L&D at graduation is definitely makes a lot of sense. I think for the sake of trying to put accountability, if DESE just clearly said, if you are in algebra 1, you take algebra 1. There's no more the algebra 2 after algebra 1. I think that, to me, but you probably know best, Jocelyn. I think to me that would be enough instead of trying to play the L&Ds all over the place.
Yeah.
Because I would actually love if DESE would just clearly state that you take in a course when you take that course, but we don't have to. And then there's going to be an L&D here, and then there's going to be an L&D here.
Yeah.
Because I think that's a nightmare for you guys. It's definitely a nightmare and causing a lot of angst for us. I just wonder if that would be in itself enough. But then again, you see the bigger picture than I do. So
right.
Do what you do.
Right. There's a very specific reason for doing this, because, as you mentioned, we had some districts who were not necessarily assessing when they awarded credit. So like a student, they may have had 30 students take algebra 1 and 25 of them passed the entire class, and they gave them algebra credit, but they didn't test them because they weren't going to test them until after algebra 2, which was really, so some of that is that, and because we've had a lot of feedback related to that, we are continuing to look at that. I'm not certain where we'll go with it yet, but we are reviewing it.
Jocelyn, this is a pretty specific question, so I don't know if you can answer, but so for instance, we're one of those districts that our 8th graders who were getting awarded algebra 1 credit were not taking the algebra 1 EOC, they were taking math 8.
Yep.
But moving forward, we're giving them the algebra 1 EOC by choice too, because they'll take algebra 2 in high school.
Are you a K-8 district? No. Okay.
My question is this, if we don't give up, so if sometimes we have students who take algebra 1 in 8th grade and we determine they need to take it again in 9th grade. So that's like get a credit, or they don't get the credit. They didn't necessarily fail the course.
Yep.
So that's fine then, correct? To just give them 8th grade math and then they would take the algebra 1 in high school? again?
Yeah. And we're working on some clarifying language related to that. It's tricky because if you don't believe they've mastered the content and you in your district know you're placing that student in an algebra 1 course, then you should do that. And that would be their assessment window. If you have them in algebra and you there may be some sort of data review that would look at that, or we're in the process of walking through how we would look at that to see how many students were in an algebra class and they took a grade 8 math, so just know that process is kind of this whole conversation related to end of course assessment and L&D. We're looking at that very carefully, not just for our K-12s, but also for our K-8s who have that same sort of, we're trying to encourage them to do the advanced math content as well, which sometimes is problematic for them.
Okay, yeah, I mean, we have one student, so I don't think it'll bring, but let's make sure.
Yep.
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions?
One more. So sorry, Jocelyn. I'm so sorry. So we have, for some reason, the offices of the higher ed is making us making our seniors now take the algebra 1 for A+. Because they're the ones, like, it should have been waived one more year. It would have made so much more sense. But so we have some of our kids who have to take that.
Yep.
There's been two sides of this argument too. Like, so do we have to submit, hopefully not, submit the letter of appeal with all the kids who are taking algebra 1 for A+? Can we do that after they're done testing? Or does it have to be done before? And hopefully not, because we're all starting to test now. So
do you send that letter to higher ed?
no, it goes to you all for the scores not to count.
Oh,
Whole thing, you have to do that whole request for the.
And this is new for us. We've never done it. And so it's new for a lot of districts because, there might be one or two.
If you know who you're going to retest for algebra 1 purposes, or you're testing for algebra 1 purposes, I would send that letter as soon as possible.
Okay.
Do we get, because I just sent one in a spreadsheet, a file with their names following that document, the form for the A+ appeal or for the appeal. And I did I guess it's that FTP, request that FTP to send that. All right. Is there any way to get confirmation that it was received?
Sure. Jill, can you remind me which district you're in?
Valley Park. No, I'm sorry, Jill, or it's Jill Lawson at Lindbergh Schools. I was gonna say I was Megan, sorry.
Hey, so while you're at it, Valley Park also submitted that and we didn't receive anything either.
Well, thanks for throwing off and making me look bad that I haven't submitted mine, guys. Thanks, appreciate that.
Please Megan, which school district are you in?
Valley Park.
Valley Park.
But I will say, last year I submitted appeals and never heard anything back either. So.
Okay, well, we're also trying to resolve that issue. And just know that we get so many of them. Like last year, we had probably over 10,000 different appeals. And I know that there's only 550 some LEAs in the state, but that's an incredible amount of appeals because they're not all coming in together. So based on what type of appeal it is, but we are going to try to start generating a letter that goes out that acknowledges that we are in receipt of the document. And then what I will tell you is that we're pretty limited staff. I would always suggest that districts go back and look at that after the appeal, during and after the appeals process, because it takes us a couple of days to run through the system, but to make sure you're seeing that the appeals flowed through the process. So the same reports that I mentioned earlier should reflect the changes that you appeal. Just to help confirm that the data you are seeing is accurate. And I will check. Sherry, you have not submitted an appeal yet, correct?
No, just let's all clarify. Sherry and Winslow has not submitted it. It's coming soon. It's coming soon.
Okay,
I'm right on
perfect.
top of that, Rose.
Okay, well, I will check for Jill and Megan, and what I will do is just pop you an email and let you know that we've received it.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions? Shauna, do you have any, or Valerie?
No, they were asking such great questions, like it's way over our head, but I think just want to appreciate you taking the time to come on the call. And I hopefully thank you, those of you who joined. We just want to provide that opportunity in your busy jobs to be able to do that. So, and I really appreciate you walking over the website and things that helps provide clarity, and we'll be able to post that.
Certainly. And we can also, again, once we get past summer, I'm happy to do something again. I can tell you we will have a public meeting sometime in the middle of June in Jefferson City that will go over all of the changes that we've made to the scoring guide. That is always open to the public, but it is generally not recorded. So there will be that opportunity. And then for any of you who attend the administrators conference prior to the beginning of the school year, we'll present some information there as well. It may not be specific to the report, but it may be helping districts consider what their data might look like. And then we have done a few presentations to the principals groups that are around the state. And so it's a shameless plug. If you all know of groups that are interested in learning more about MSIP, how it functions, what the data looks like, how you can improve your data quality, reach out to us as well. And we are more than happy to work with you, whether it's somebody directly from my staff or one of your area supervisors.
Hey, Jocelyn, we got that awesome memo the other day about how that the kindergarten, or not the kindergarten, K3 assessment for the reading, is that going to impact APR at all? Is that going to be factored in at all?
It is not currently.
Okay, and there's not talk of it, or that may come. Okay.
No, and if it was included at all, it will be the 23-24 annual performance report, and it would not be looking at it will not look at performance. It will look at the number of students who are assessed. I believe that is the plan.
Well, thank you so much for your time today, Jocelyn, and thank you everyone who attended. Hopefully you got some good answers and feel better about everything moving forward.
And Jill and Megan, I will be in touch shortly.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Shauna.
Thanks.
Yep, thank